our good friend RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys. And RJ, before we get into the specifics of the game, I see you often on Twitter tweeting out the different betting odds for the different prop bets and whatnot, including Super Bowl and MVP status. So I'm going to ask you right here, right now, as of December 12th, does Dak Prescott win the NFL MVP?
Yeah, I think so. I wrote an article about a month ago, right before the Cowboys played the Panthers. Dak was plus 3,500 to win the award. And obviously gambling's not legal here in Texas, but I mean, it made all the sense in the world based on who the Cowboys were about to play and kind of the way things were looking in the league to jump on that. And now he's, depending on where you look, plus 160. I mean, if you got that golden ticket, congratulations to you. I think he's got the story, he's got the narrative, he's got the national love. Finally, he's got the team support, and he's got the chance if he blows through these next few games and I think wins at least 2 of the next 3. I think it's his to lose. So yeah, absolutely, lock it up.
Question, Mr. RJ. It's Blake here with you again. Other than the Bills being at home, why do you think that they are 2.5-point favorites with Dallas coming into town?
Well, Blake, you and I didn't get off to a great start, so we're still working on our relationship together. But I think the Bills are kind of the bizarro Eagles. Mm-hmm. I think we all agree that the Eagles are not as good as maybe a 10-3 record would indicate. I know we've all been kind of singing that song for a while. The Bills are on the opposite end of that spectrum. You can poke holes in the Eagles and point to advanced metrics and things like that show that they're maybe not a top 5 team, however you want to qualify that in the NFL. Whereas the Bills, I mean, by DVOA or point differential or anything like that, they're right there. I mean, where the Eagles have managed to kind of have these miraculous moments to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, the Bills have done the opposite. I mean, you think about the 12-men on the field penalty, obviously, against Denver on Monday night. Mm-hmm. You think about the way they handled the end of the game against Philly. I mean, they almost blew it, to be fair, against Kansas City, but they've had these weird just kind of sequences where they've blown games that they really should have won. And so I do think that odds makers recognize that. But the fact that they're not at least 3-point favorites is interesting and certainly suggests that the Cowboys are a good team, obviously.
Let's go back to the Cowboys' win over the Eagles on Sunday Night Football, a nice 20-point victory inside of the division. And one thing that I kept kind of pondering throughout these past 48 hours or so is just how well this secondary has stepped up in the face of adversity. I mean, we've talked about it all year with the Trayvon Diggs injury, him going down early, but here lately, you've had a couple of guys have some rough games and instantly bounce back. And ever since Trayvon went down, those first couple of games were a little bit rough for a guy like Stephon Gilmore, but here lately, he has been an absolute blanket in coverage. Deron Bland allowed just 8 yards in coverage against the Eagles. What have you seen from this secondary here the past month or so that's impressed you?
I think it's been really awesome to see Gilmore have a chance to be what we all envisioned. The Trayvon injury, I think, really changed the calculus mostly for him. He wasn't traded for to be 2019 Defensive Player of the Year, lockdown #1 corner, but the moment the injury happened, he kind of had to step into those shoes. And so Deron Bland's emergence really kind of allowed everything to fall back into place a little bit, so to speak. And so it was really great to see him get his shine, especially after A.J. Brown called him old or whatever. But also, I mean, you mentioned the whole group. Deron Bland, obviously, I mean, everybody's really well aware of who he is at this point. But Malik Hooker had a great game. Donovan Wilson had a great game. Jaron Kearse showed up. I mean, like, everybody was kind of eating. And we talk so much about the pass rush and how often they get home and things like that. But I mean, the secondary has, I wouldn't say a claim to be the best unit on the defense, but if it weren't for Micah Parsons and his unicornness, I think they would. And so it takes a village to shut down an elite offense like that and to strip the ball away 3 times from 3 superstar playmakers. And the Cowboys did that, and it was really, really fun to kind of experience.
RJ, I'm going to ask you to kind of take a step back and look holistically about the whole season and kind of looking in the future crystal ball. Would you say the Cowboys are closer to the top of the pack, kind of the Eagles and Bills and Ravens teams, or are they at that same level as the Niners? Where would you kind of put them in position with that?
I don't think anybody's on the same playing field as the Niners, and that's obviously terrifying. It's going to be fun to watch them play Baltimore in a few weeks and certainly see if anyone can hang with them, it might be the Ravens right now. But And even as it relates to the Cowboys specifically, as annoying as it is to admit, I mean, if the Cowboys meet the Niners in the playoffs, I don't know how any of us could objectively pick the Cowboys based on, literally all of recent history. And so if we acknowledge that there's a wide gap between San Francisco and the field, I think Dallas is right there with whoever you want to put there, whether that's Baltimore. I don't know that you can put Philly there this week specifically. Miami obviously took a little bit of a step back as well. It's hard to argue. I mean, today's power rankings day in the NFL, most outlets did have the Cowboys as their number 2 team. And they're peaking at the right time. They're getting performances from all these, I don't want to call them role players, but not necessarily star players. And I know we all kind of agree with Dak that he didn't necessarily play his absolute A-plus game on Sunday night, and yet they won handily. And so those are all exciting things, and I think they have, I think we agree, the MVP of the NFL playing the most important position for them, and they have probably the defensive player of the year rushing the passer, and they have one of the runners-up for defensive player of the year playing cornerback, and the other cornerback they have is a former defensive player of the year. There's all the reason in the world to believe that they're one of the upper echelon teams.
It's RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys joining us here on the Get Right on 105.3 The Fan. We talked about injured defensive players earlier. Jonathan Hankins goes down with a high ankle sprain. How concerned are you with the run defense going forward for the next few weeks, as it does sound like it could have been a little bit worse than we expected?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly hesitate, I think, to call it good news, but certainly could have been worse news. And obviously these next 4 games are potentially incredibly consequential, and a lot of that depends on what happens to Philly and San Francisco across the rest of the NFL. But this is a chance to, work on depth. This is a chance for Mozzie Smith to get some opportunities and to really kind of prove what the Cowboys saw in him, why they drafted him in the first round. Again, I would not frame it as the Cowboys are at a point in the season where they're playing with house money. But they're a playoff team, and they're, in all likelihood, as much as we want to hope that they're going to win the division, they're probably going to be the 5 seed. And so if they have a chance to strengthen some depth that can be valuable in one moment of the divisional round or whatever the case may be, I think that's I don't want to call it blessing in disguise, but the silver lining to a very small degree from this overall situation.
So in a resurgence, we saw Michael Gallup kind of come through, make some big catches, obviously had the touchdown there in the red zone. What have you thought about him? Has he kind of been flying under the radar, been producing, but we just haven't seen it? Where do you see his role with the Cowboys moving forward?
Yeah, that's, the fan base has been, I don't want to say hard on Michael Gallup, but I mean, I think that would be fair to characterize it that way. I know we all enjoy the Sounds from the Sideline video that the great team at DallasCowboys.com puts together. And I thought last week's was really interesting in how CeeDee Lamb made it a point to highlight how involved and how influential Michael Gallup was, on his touchdown. And so I do think that Gallup might be doing a little bit more dirty work, hidden yardage than may meet the eye. But this is what this time of year is about. I mean, as amazing as CeeDee Lamb is and as awesome as Brandon Cooks is, you just can't have that be the case week in and week out. You're going to have your role players, your depth players, your whatever step up, and there's going to have to be a game where Michael Gallup goes off or Michael Gallup has the clutch touchdown at the end of the first half. And so the floor is so much higher for the Cowboys right now than it was a year ago, and that's what I think is really exciting about the team as a whole.
RJ, why does this season in the McCarthy era feel different at this point than any of the other seasons in the McCarthy era?
I think the obvious answer is probably because they're winning, so largely, and they're dominating teams. And the one time they've kind of been tested in a 10-round fight, they've won against Seattle. Now they've obviously been dominated by San Francisco, but I think some of it is, they're battle tested and they've built scar tissue together. So it's not, I think when things are new, you don't have that experience, even as a fan, you haven't seen them fall. And so you know how precious it is. You know how desperate you have to be. And you see the fruits of all the labor. And I think, I'm happy to see on a national level that Mike is starting to get, I think, his due. And I think more people are starting to give him credit. But I think his program has really started to be implemented. And I think enough time has gone on that people are finally willing to acknowledge how great of a coach he is and how great of a play caller he is. And I think that's part of it, too, is that he went into this season and he said, I want to call the plays, and I'm willing to move on from somebody who helped us be an incredibly efficient offense. And for like 6 months, the whole world laughed at him. And so I think that some of it is people starting to realize that they might have been wrong, which wasn't necessarily the case before. And so it's refreshing. I mean, they're not quite seniors on campus is not the right analogy, but there's enough time built up that I think people are willing to respect the overall process.
RJ, last one before we let you go. If I told you that through 14 weeks of play, Brandon Aubrey would be the Dallas Cowboys kicker and he would be perfect on field goal attempts, if I told you that during the summer, what would you have told me?
Yeah, I mean, I have killed the Cowboys for how they've handled the kicking situation a lot of times. And I was a little bit more patient this time around just because they've kind of earned the benefit of the doubt. I mean, a year and a half ago, they just plucked Brett Maher out of thin air and obviously brought him back. But and he was great. And I feel so bad for Brett for how things ended last year because he had a great regular season and nobody wanted to give him credit for that at the end. But the way they discovered Brandon Aubrey, the trust they put into him, not just in general, but certainly on Sunday night, he is a certifiable weapon. And the fact that he hasn't won, any individual accolades is stupid to this point. He better win NFC Special Teams Player of the Week this week. He's amazing, and it's awesome to see his story being told so much. He deserves all the credit in the world. What he's doing it's impossible. I mean, the record is to start a career for consecutive field goals made was 19, and he's at 30. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's unbelievable.
Butter Aubrey.
Butter Aubrey has been just that, and you can find his great work with Blogging the Boys, and you can find him on Twitter at RJ Ochoa. He is RJ Ochoa. Appreciate the time as always, man, and hope to talk soon.
Appreciate it. If I don't talk to you, Alec and Blake, and everybody else before then, have a very happy holiday season, a very Merry Christmas, you and your families.